Welcome, welcome. It is February 26th. We are 250 days to Election Day. I am thrilled to be here tonight. We were talking a little bit earlier about how we always introduce this show by saying that we are excited to be here, and we know that you can tell that by our enthusiasm. And so we were playing around a little bit with trying to say something different. How are you feeling about being here tonight, Owen?
Yeah, I'm feeling very enthused.
Enthused, great. Yeah, that's three of the synonyms that we thought about in order to say this. I think this is good feedback. We got to make sure that we are varying our words, even if we are in fact excited. So
I'm feeling avid about this project in general.
Excellent. So yeah, 250 days till election. We are tomorrow is the halfway day of the 90-day General Assembly session. I've been spending a lot of time there trying to work on HB 101, which is our bill with Delegate Simmons in order to get access for all parties to the general election debate stage. I think we're making some real progress on that bill. We'll see. We have to have everything out of the House of Delegates on that bill by March 17th. That time is getting close. So, I'm spending a lot of time. I'm driving down to Annapolis, sitting in the hallway, trying to catch people as they go by so that we can talk to delegates, we can talk to advocates and things like that. It's an interesting experience if you've never done it. A lot of it is just sitting around waiting to grab somebody for 5 minutes on their way to coffee, or strangely enough on their way to the bathroom or something like that. Try to grab folks for a quick conversation after their committee hearings or whatever, but it's working. It's producing really good stuff, and I hope we have next week. I think we're going to talk a whole lot about HB 101, where it is. I think our guest next week is going to be a debate expert who can help us dive into this even more. So that stuff is happening.
Don't we have an action link on HB 101 now that folks can fill out?
Yeah, so LBS put out an action link yesterday. We will put that in the show notes and make sure that everybody has access to it. Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle is really helping us on this. They're pushing folks to call delegates on the committee in order to ask them to move it to a vote. That's what we want at this point. We've had the hearings, we've had the discussions. We want the subcommittee and the committee to move it to a vote. We hope we're going to win that vote. We hope that vote happens, but that's what the action is right now, and we will push that out, put it in the show notes, and send it out in an email this weekend.
Excellent.
So, we got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. Some good and interesting stories, more legislation. I think I've testified on 15 different bills at this point so far this year, between written testimony and oral testimony. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those tonight. And then the guest we have coming on tonight is a person that you've worked with a little bit or a lot. Owen, do you want to give a brief introduction for that?
Yeah, I am enthused that our friend Carlos Orbe Jr. is coming on the show. We've worked in a education justice related coalition around multilingualism for, 4 years or so now, maybe 5. And he also worked on the Call Act, which I talked about on this show at length, even before I was a candidate in 2024. So we'll have a lot to talk about, and what he's noticing in the General Assembly session and in the broader advocacy contexts more generally. So it'll be great to have Carlos on the show.
Excellent. And then we're going to have a section where we talk about the filing deadline was this week for Democrats and Republicans. So the primary races for Democrats and Republicans are set. The filing deadline for small party candidates and independent candidates is in July. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Some striking numbers that came out about lack of one-party competition in some places and lack of two-party competition in other places. Really good numbers to get into. We'll dive into that after we talk to Carlos. And then we are bringing back what I hope is a fan favorite, which is a little bit of the Q&A. We got a good question this week coming in, and I wanted to take a chance to, do some answering of that. So I think that is an overview of all the stuff that we are thrilled about to get started. And you ready to get started?
Let's get into it. So you mentioned that you've been in Annapolis a bunch and you've been testifying on bills. So, the first one that we're going to talk about relates to public financing. As you know, we are we're a campaign that's participating and hoping to qualify for public financing. And so we believe that this is a great policy and program for grassroots democracy. And so tell us a little bit about HB 0962. What does it do in this public financing arena?
Yeah, so HB 962 is a bill that extends the existing county level public financing programs that exist in, I think, 5 or 6 counties in the state of Maryland, to allow them to opt in to include their school board races in the public financing. So school board races are nonpartisan races, and they have a primary in which all of the candidates compete, and that reduces down to a general in which there are a smaller number of folks that are competing. It's really like some of the primary reforms that people talk about where there's a top X number that get through. School board races are also historically the place where the biggest bang for your buck comes from outside actors. Dark money has focused on school board races over the last decade or so. And before that, national campaigns were often focused on school board races because people don't pay a ton of attention to school board races. They don't get the same kind of candidates as a lot of the other races do. And they are a place that is a sort of contested space. What happens in schools, what happens in curriculum is very contested. So this bill extends public financing to the school board races. We are fully in favor of this. Not only do we think school board races are important, we also think public financing is important. There was a PAC in Maryland in 2022, the 1776 PAC, that spent $90,000 and to great effect on school board races in 2022. And we think public financing is a way to give an antidote to that big money that comes in from outside, is a way to give community-minded folks who are grounded in community and whose base is in the community the ability to raise money, get matching funds, and compete. It's the same thing. You're never going to be able to outcompete some big national interest who wants to turn your school board race into a part of the culture war. But if you can have that public financing, you can at least use your community-minded candidate can have the ability to compete on at least on the same playing field, if not an entirely level playing field.
And school board commissioners that's an unpaid position, right? In Maryland.
I think it's unpaid in every county. There may be some counties that there may be some stipend. You may know more than I do on this, but it is mostly an unpaid position that is oftentimes, a lot of responsibility, a lot of impact. And not a lot of coverage, not a lot of attention to it. And so it's a hard race. We have to respect the people who do it. And now in Maryland, they're increasingly competing against outside interests like Moms for Liberty, and a lot of right-wing groups are starting to fund school board races. And once that starts, it creates an arms race from outside groups where both sides are gonna, or all sides are gonna try to do that. So we think this bill is a good antidote to that. It doesn't solve the problems of politicization of local school boards, or it doesn't solve outside money, but it at least gives folks who choose to participate in the program a good way to compete.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect fit for school board races. You're really doing public service if you're winning election and serving on a school board. So to have to deal with deep pocketed interests who are politicizing and meddling in those elections is really a frustrating reality. And if you can use the power of community members and matching funds and win that way, that's a much better way to go about it.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, so another one that's also election related and that we've talked about in general, this idea of ranked choice voting on this show a few times. HB 1289 sets up a task force. Is that right?
Yeah, so HB 1289 by Delegate Terrassa from Howard County sets up a task force to study ranked choice voting and approval voting. And we testified favorable with amendments on this, as did Ranked Choice Voting Maryland. And the amendment that we offered was to add proportional representation to what it is that this study would cover. I actually gave oral testimony on this as well. So if you can see it on our newsletter site, newsletter.gogreen26.com. That we have both written and oral testimony on this. Basically, we think that it is good to study electoral systems. We think it's important to have smart people who do this work and study this stuff be on a task force to study different electoral systems. And we think that proportional representation belongs in the mix here, because proportional representation is designed for multi-member districts. And in Maryland, we have House districts that have 3 members in them in a lot of races. The way we vote right now is called sort of block voting. And so if there's 3 people for the seat, you get 3 votes. And what this has produced in Maryland is there's not a single multi-member district that had a split partisan outcome in 2022. So every district that is a multi-member, that elected multiple members at the ballot box, elected the same partisan split. Now there's some districts that are gerrymandered so that they have a 2-person district that is like 22A and a 1-person district that is 22B or something like that, or some have A, B, and C. And there's a couple of delegations where there is a split in those, but none of the 3 people on a ballot or 2 people on a ballot districts produced anything other than straight partisan blocks. Mm-hmm. This is not great for representation. We'll talk about that later on in the show when we get to the sort of talking about the filing deadline. So what we said is that this task force should expand beyond ranked choice voting and approval voting and also consider proportional representation. And what's great about this is two of the people who work most on proportional representation are right here in Maryland. Lee Drutman is a professor at Johns Hopkins, and this guy Maxwell Stearns, whose book I have right here, who wrote the book Parliamentary America. He works at the Carey School of Government. And so one of the things that we talk about in this is the New Zealand Commission to study electoral reform that was chartered in 1983. And it had this powerful combination of scholars, practitioners, and activists who came together, and they weren't bound by a set of limited prescriptions about what they were supposed to study. And they came up with mixed member proportional representation. New Zealand became the first British descended or European descended country to use a mixed member proportional system. First English speaking country, I think that's how it is called, to use a proportional representation system. And it has created a form of government that is more representative, more compromising. So we think that this, along with approval voting and ranked choice voting, deserves to be studied. There's been bills in Maryland for like 5 years to try to adopt ranked choice voting in Montgomery County, and we still support those bills, but they haven't moved out of the General Assembly. And so we threw our hat in the ring to say we think that smart people who study this stuff for a living should be tasked by the General Assembly with coming up with recommendations, and encourage this bill to pass. I think the written testimony and the oral testimony that I gave on it is very good. Michelle Whitaker from Ranked Choice Voting Maryland also testified on it. Some other folks testified on it. So I encourage folks to go check that out. We'll make sure we share the link in the show notes if it's not already there. Yeah, that was another one, and I think the video is good and the written testimony is pretty thorough. So I encourage folks to check that out.
And that commission would study mostly state level offices, right? It wouldn't touch the kind of at-large countywide commissioner model or anything like that.
As written, it would not narrow to the state, but there was an amendment to it that I think the sponsor is going to accept that would narrow it to just state races. And so it would use approval voting, ranked choice voting, and proportional representation in order to figure out how to get better outcomes, better accountability, and better responsiveness in state government level races.
Yeah, because I was just thinking some of those countywide or citywide, in some of those cities on the Eastern Shore, for example, that use citywide in a way that ends up being regressive. If it was proportional citywide, that could, how would that look? That could be interesting.
Yeah, and the courts have recommended proportional representation as a means of overcoming local voter rights concerns with at-large districts, right? And so it is a known remedy that is sometimes suggested when at-large seats have a racially disparate impact, is to make it proportional. So it does not touch those, but I think if a commission studied it at the state level, it would probably lay the foundation either for a commission at the local level or for some implementation at the local level.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. So what's your count at this point in terms of number of bills, and what's the ratio from?
So, I think it's like 6 that I've testified on in person, 15 that I've submitted written testimony for, and we have it all compiled on a page on our newsletter. So if you go to newsletter, I can actually find it here. I think it's newsletter, Go Green 26 testimony or something like that. But you can go see it all there. We want to make sure that people have access to it, and that you can see what we're saying. And sometimes when we put this stuff out there, folks disagree with it, and that's great. I was going back and forth with somebody in the comments on that testimony yesterday who was an avid believer in approval voting, and he is very enthused by approval voting, and does not like proportional representation. So we were having some discussion. He was sharing some articles, and that's what we hope to generate for this. When we put these ideas out there, we believe in them, but if other people disagree or have pushback or want to say, well, actually, I'm more than happy to go down a well, actually rabbit hole that somebody provides me, especially if they provide stuff to read or watch or think about. We think that that's part of this process, and we think that we wouldn't put it on YouTube and on our blog if we didn't want commentary.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important political education, thinking about voting as, there are many flavors and different processes to vote. And it kind of reminds me of when I was a younger activist and I was learning about consensus-based decision-making. And I was like, wait, so it's not just majority rules or I'm in charge, so this is how it is. Like there are other ways of making decisions. And I think once once you have that realization, whether it's through a formal, state board of elections process, or with your community association or some other activist group that you're a part of, once you really start thinking about decision-making process and looking for the best way to make the decision with whatever group or whatever scale you're working with, that can be really empowering, and can lead to better outcomes for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the question is, what is your, and so in the pretty good, I think, written testimony that I put together for HB 1289, I talk about a distinction between voting systems and electoral systems. And so ranked choice voting, I think, is a voting system. It changes how we count the votes, but it doesn't really change how we allocate the seats. Its goal is to get to a majority so that a seat that is held by a single office holder has done so with a majority. Proportional representation takes a whole different approach to that. Proportional representation says that minoritarian viewpoints are important, and if you have 30% in a district, you should have 30% of the seats in that district. So in our current system, if the Green Party had 30% support in District 45, where I live, we would have 0% of the seats, because the Democrats who would have 60% of the support would have all of the seats, right? But in a proportional system, that 30% would likely get us a seat. And as our conversation with Shane Robinson said a couple of weeks ago, that begins to change how coalitions work. That begins to change how outcomes work. And you can see some of this in Annapolis. Last week, we talked about HB 979, which has a Democrat who was initially endorsed by the DSA when he ran, I believe, and a Republican from Cecil County. And today, that same Democrat and another Republican who's in the Freedom Caucus sponsored a bill to give attorney generals more latitude. I think we talked about that last week, too.
Inspector generals, right?
Inspector generals, right. And so it is like there's some of that happening right now, but in a proportional system where you had more people that had more diverse representation, I think you would get more of that coalition type of thing. And I also think that it would incentivize more people to run in these races. When we get to the filing deadline stuff later, you're going to see how many of these races people don't have a primary opponent, don't have a general opponent. And I think that is partly because the system we have makes it so hard to beat the dominant party in any district. So a lot of people just don't even try.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so let's keep it moving. Let's move on to our stories to watch segment, which, we've been watching a lot of stories over the past few months. There's a lot of shenanigans going on here.
Can we just take this question from Amy real quick?
Sure.
So Amy Sachs says, the one out of 100 Dems who seem interested when I bring up PR complained that we'd end up with overt white supremacists in local office if we employed it, which sounds like an excuse to me. And Amy goes on to say, given what we frequently end up with now. And that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that in Maryland, if we had proportional representation, it would encourage the Freedom Caucus, which is the Trumpiest part of the Republican Party, to split off from the Republican Party and run on their own. But they're already elected. And I think that having, for those of us who prefer progressive policy, having a Freedom Party that might work with us on some electoral reforms, they're not going to work with us on a lot of stuff. They're hard on voter ID. They're hard on a lot of that stuff, but they might work on things that free up multi-party competition. Some of them are helping support us with our debate bill right now. They're already in office, and if they were fighting with the Republicans on that side of the aisle, it wouldn't be a terrible thing, I think, for Maryland. And it would allow more Black nationalists, more Greens, more working class folks, more and more centrist independents into office. So, I would say it's a non-unique concern that it's going to elect white supremacists if we had proportional representation, because they're getting elected now. but it would open up the door for other folks who don't have the deep pockets and don't have the national connections in order to get an office. So we've heard this concern too, and we say the same thing. It's already happening. What this helps with is allowing a more diversity across the rest of the spectrum.
Well said. So, stories to watch. We've got some rumblings about a soccer stadium being proposed for Baltimore, and this is one of the ones that I didn't go super deep in, and I was playing basketball at the Y last weekend or so when the headline broke, and I was talking to my friend Will, and I was like, yeah, that'd be cool, like to have a soccer stadium. And then you and I have our weekly one of our weekly meetings, and you kind of rain all over my parade. So what's the source of the shade on the stadium here, Andy?
Okay, so first of all, I would love it if we had professional soccer here in Baltimore. It would be great. And so there's a deal that Carmelo Anthony and the mayor and the state are trying to put together to bring a developmental league soccer team here to Baltimore. And it would be part of the DC United soccer franchise, which is the DC Major League Soccer team. It would be a minor league development team, a development league team that would have a soccer stadium that played in Carroll Park, Baltimore. And that stadium would have some stuff for schools and students and some soccer fields and all of that. I would love it if there was a soccer team here. I'd love it if there was a soccer stadium. Carroll Park may not be the best place to put it. It's a golf course right now, but it's a golf course. It's a publicly owned golf course, and it was one of the first places the Black Marylanders could play golf. So there's a lot of complicatedness about the location. But none of this is about really the location or about whether we want to have a soccer team and a soccer stadium here in Maryland. There's two things that it is about, though. The first thing is a theme that we've talked about a lot on this show, which is we should stop subsidizing wealthy people's sports franchises by giving them stadiums so that they can make the profit off of it. This is a pattern that we have in Maryland and we see in a lot of places. And one of the things that we've talked about with this is, wouldn't it be great if we had public ownership? Public ownership is hard in the big four sports because many of them have, at the major league level, many of them have antitrust exemptions or laws that protect them. Major League Soccer doesn't have that. But even beyond that, this is a minor league team for Major League Soccer. The price would not be very high. And in the same league, there's a team that Chattanooga, Tennessee has, and that team is publicly owned. It is owned by the fans, and the city has a role in it. So what you have there is a real good opportunity for Maryland to try out at a low price tag in a league that is welcoming to it, and in a place where we could afford it, to have a publicly owned or community owned football team, I think is the word that I'm supposed to use if I'm really enthused about this.
I think you're supposed to say football club.
Football club. Okay. Anyway, so we could have, instead of building a stadium for the wealthy owners of DC United, we could have Baltimore Public FC or something like that. And there's a great opportunity to do it here. It's a league that is open to it, and it is a sport that is open to it. So that's one thing. The second thing is, when I looked at the bill, this goes in the it's always worse when you look at the bill. Like, they used to say never read the comments. And sometimes I feel like legislators want to be like, never read the bill. Well, I read the bill in this case, and there is a part in the bill that talks about where the funding comes from. So we've talked about the blueprint for Maryland's future on this show, which is the multi-generational or the decade-long billions of dollar investment in Maryland's public education system. Well, part of that is funded by sports gambling revenue. So Maryland legalized sports gambling by a constitutional amendment. And when we did that, we said what we always say when we legalize some form of gambling: this money is going to go to education. Allow people to gamble from their phones and it will help fund our schools, they say, right? So that's been the way that it worked for a while. Last year, they started to inch their way into that, and in order to close the budget deficit, they allowed some of that sports gambling money to go to the general fund, but just for 1 year. But this bill inserts a clause that says that the $217 million bond that they are putting in to build the soccer stadium for the wealthy owners of DC United will be paid back with sports gambling revenue. The principal and interest on the bond will be paid back with sports gambling revenue before that money is allowed to go to the blueprint. So and this is a while, like I had to read it a couple of times. I had to show it to some people. I had to like step away and come back. And I can't believe that this would possibly be the case, but I believe it is. So these bills have a hearing next Tuesday and next Thursday, and we're going to go talk about both of these things. We're going to talk about the opportunity to have publicly funded Baltimore Public FC, Baltimore FC Public, however they want to call it. And we're going to talk about the fact that if we're going to have a football club here for a minor league football club here in Baltimore, it shouldn't be funded with money that is allocated to go to public schools.
Yeah, so sports and sports politics maybe everywhere, but especially in Maryland. First they're buying horse farms that they end up not using and doing all kinds of shady stuff to the horses, and now they're trying to literally take money out of the school budget to build a stadium for
not just money out of the school budget, money that people are spending because they've been addicted to gambling by a state that doesn't want to raise taxes.
Yeah.
And the way that they sold that to us was, well, when we addict your children to gambling, we're going to give some of the money back to the schools that they went to, right? And now, Senator Antonio Hayes to Baltimore in the Senate is sponsoring this bill that, if I'm reading it right, and I think I am, and if I'm not, I'm sure he and others will tell me that I'm reading it wrong and that I don't know how to read it, but I've read it 3 or 4 times and checked with some folks that should know. If I'm reading this bill right, it takes that gambling money, gives it to paying back the debt to build this wealthy person a stadium so that they can make money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so we should keep watching this, and make sure that they're not doing what's proposed in that bill, right? I mean, they can they can amend it, right? They can take that part out of it, and we could, debate it on the merits. But obviously, that is totally absurd and should not be moving forward.
Yeah.
The other story that I think is on a lot of people's minds these days that we're continuing to monitor and take action around is what's happening with the immigrant justice movement after the governor signed a bill proposed by the General Assembly to end these 287G agreements between county sheriffs in Maryland and ICE. And so, it seems like the pressure is starting to build. We're hearing all kinds of things. So what's kind of the timeline? And then we can kind of get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, so last week, Governor Moore signed a bill that banned the 287G agreements. There were 9 counties that had formalized cooperation between the county and ICE. And it was a big priority. People pushed hard for it. But I think we talked about this on the show last week. It is not the vast majority of the 3,500 or so immigration arrests in the state of Maryland in the last year. I think the number that I saw was 170 transfers from custody of these 9 counties via the 287G program. And that's really bad for the people who are involved in it. And it's really bad for the people who are afraid that would happen to them. But, it was not the vast majority of what was happening in that space. So it was a good thing that happened last week. But now the sheriffs immediately, like 2 days after Moore met, They went on Fox News, they went on the national news, and they said that while they're not going to legally challenge the bill, they're already devising a set of workarounds that they're going to use to continue to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. And so I think 23 out of the 24 counties have some form of informal cooperation on the books between their police and their correctional folks and ICE. So, that being said, there's also the feds have decided to start targeting Maryland as a result of this. They're trying to put into place they've proposed several new immigrant detention facilities, one in Hyattsville, one in Hagerstown, one in Howard County that we've talked about, and we think that there's going to be more coming. We think this is a signal from them that they are planning on ramping up enforcement here. And the White House called Maryland and Westmore despicable for doing this, and they're starting to do that rhetoric ramp up that they did in Chicago and LA and Minnesota. And so I think that and Tom Homan threatened that Maryland was going to be the next place that gets the Minneapolis style flood. So
yeah, I think I read somewhere that the number of like detainee meals that they've ordered for, I don't know if they keep them in the freezer or something, has tripled, in the last week or something. So they're stockpiling, right? The writing's on the wall.
Yep. And, this is the way that they do it. The sheriffs are already on board with saying, well, now that you did this, they're going to have to come here. And the Republican candidates in some of those races are saying the same thing. Too bad that Westmore did this. Now they're going to have to come terrorize your communities, and it's Westmore's fault. Like, okay, that's going to be what they do. But I think what's important here is that the Community Trust Act, which is heard this week, in both the House and the Senate, begins to really start to do this process of closing some of those other gaps. So it expands prohibitions on law enforcement turning people over. It expands a prohibition on correctional facilities turning folks over. And it is part of a series of bills that I think help to protect other parts of the system now that the 287G agreements are done. I think these things have a good chance of passing. And so I think, we need to just kind of keep an eye on them, keep supporting them. We need to understand that in this context, the 287G agreements were important, but they can't be the entirety of our focus, because if they're the entirety of our focus, we're going to miss out on all the ways that they are already detaining people, deporting people, and terrorizing communities.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, this is, we have to be ready. A friend who works in adult education like I do sent me a kind of resource and strategy packet that folks in Minnesota had put together. And this is kind of a good time to prepare for the worst, and hopefully it doesn't happen. But that's kind of the feeling that is out there right now.
Yep. And I want to say, there's a lot of Democrats who are starting to say some of the things that we've been saying: abolish these agreements, abolish ICE, restructure how we protect communities, restructure the way that these things work. But there's nobody in the governor's race, even if there's people in the General Assembly who are saying it, there's nobody in the governor's race who's even close to saying it. And I'll say even when Westmore signed the 287G agreement, he then the next day said, well, there's some wiggle room for some cooperation and things like that. So we need to keep the pressure up. We need to keep making sure that we're not putting all of our eggs in that basket, and that we're understanding the multiple ways that local government and state government are cooperating, allowing immigration enforcement, and put pressure on each of them. So with that, I do think our guest has arrived. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce him, and then I'll bring him on the stage. So,
Yeah, I am enthusiastic to welcome my friend and fellow good troublemaker, Carlos Orbe Jr. He's the founder of Mindful Communications, which is a beautiful name for an LLC. Carlos's focus is on education, policy, Latino community advocacy, policy in general, communications in general, and we were coalition partners on some Maryland State Department of Education advocacy and organizing for a long time. We also worked together on the Credit for All Language Learning Act that was passed in 2024. And so let's welcome to the show, Carlos.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy and Owen. Honestly, it's truly a pleasure to be here. My first podcast on this on StreamYard, so it's a night full of firsts here. Really happy to be here.
Well, Carlos, thank you so much for coming. I'm glad that you made it onto StreamYard. I hope you didn't have any problems getting in, but we can't wait to get into this conversation and just talk with you about what you're seeing, what you're sensing, and what you're feeling about things.
Yes.
Okay, I'm excited, guys. I'm excited. Owen, please.
So yeah, just kind of as an extension off that introduction, you and I worked together with a grassroots coalition for a number of years, focused on mostly K-12 and also some higher education policy for immigrant students, multilingual English learners. We published a Baltimore Banner op-ed together when they were still taking op-eds. And then we also advocated together for the successful passage of the Call Act, which gives students, community college students, credit for taking advanced English classes and requires that those classes transfer to universities to apply to both associates and bachelor's degrees. So kind of, when I was thinking about who can help with like social media and comms and stuff like that, you definitely came to mind. And so why was it important, for you to be involved with that effort to support the comms and the social media for the successful passage of Call Act?
Well, I have to say you can't start the story there without saying exactly about that community well that we were a part of. And I think that's a testament to the character of a lot of people involved in the passing of that. And I will say, yes, good trouble is a great term for what we were looking into. With Community Well, our main driver was language access. Like, how are we able to really take a look at the system and see what's possible? And that's something that I've learned from you, Owen, which, Andy, I'm so sorry. I've known Owen so long. I'm going to be complimenting him this entire podcast here. And I'm so looking forward to getting to know you as well. But just specifically for the Call Act, that was after we had already forged a bond. We were spending time after our work to actually get involved. And I think the volunteer basis with what we structured, what was a community I'll never forget. But yeah, so for me, my knowledge was Maryland has over 990,000 English learner students in public schools. So that was more than 22% of Maryland's household speaks a language other than English at home. Surprise, surprise. I didn't think that was revolutionary, but it's structural. And I think what families need to understand with the passing of the Call Act is that we weren't asking for a favor. It wasn't optional. It was their right. And so I think the social media organizing behind that was translating policy into plain language, right? We were trying to mobilize parents who had felt excluded or, students as well. And it was easy kind of putting faces and stories behind technical legislation. I think that in order, beyond the data, beyond the statistics, you need to find a compelling story. And we had a lot of students that showed up and, I'm still moved by the stories that I hear of what, legislation passing like the Call Act is doing. And, not to transition to like more current times, but I'm thinking of these battles I'm facing today. And something like the Call Act was almost a blessing in disguise because it really prepared us for what was to come. And, now with this year's Maryland General Assembly, we're really looking at how we can revive that aura that we had during that time. So
yeah, it was a special project, and I think you're pointing to that grassroots and volunteer energy that we brought, and it felt good to be a part of it. And I also think that like legislators and folks who do this for a living, and there should be jobs doing good work for a living in the state house, but they took note of it. They said, oh, this is not the usual suspects. This is like people who are really passionate about this. And so I think that's really important to highlight, but I'll kick it over to you, Andy.
Yeah. And I want to learn a little bit more about yourself and mindful communications and what the work you do there focuses on. I too have an LLC that I have started up recently to focus on a passion project. And I love to hear the way that folks are doing this for themselves. So tell us about mindful communications.
I'm trying this thing where if I can sum it up in a sentence, I'm doing something right. So I would like to say I focus on access and accountability inside the public systems. And, I just want to say the reason I formed this LLC is because I had the opportunity of working at some great named institutions. And I was even in the Judicial Proceedings Committee, right, for the Maryland Senate. And my task was pretty much to assess, okay, what are Republicans and the Democrats going to say when analyzing a bill? How can I find a compromise? How can I prepare for, the hesitations or the cautions that are going to be thrown my way? So I recognized in some of these bills that what about the minority? What about the under-resourced populations if this were to take effect? Like, how are we able to maneuver and truly put, my community at first, because I wasn't seeing them being spoken for in these halls or in these rooms. And that's not a knock to, the Senate. They're doing all they can, but so many different moving parts, you begin to be introduced to what this beast actually is. So with that back in my mind, I graduated with my master's. I recognize I want to work with, the Maryland Legislative Latino Caucus. They were right across the street. So during lunch, I'd be like, what are you guys doing? How, what's happening? So I was able to work with them, do some communications work. And, I recognized there were so many nonprofits in the area that did not understand what the Maryland General Assembly was. They didn't have that know-how of, hey, there is legislation being talked about the barriers I'm facing right now. And there was no translation piece between the higher ups and the street level bureaucrats and the nonprofits. At least that's what I was seeing in my community. So what do I do in a moment like this? I say, thank you for your knowledge and experience that you've taught me, but how can I represent as many nonprofits as I can to make their voice be heard? So that way, if someone has a testimony, hey, Carlos, I need someone for X, Y, and Z. Is this possible? So with that being said, mindful communications, I believe, is a policy strategy and communications firm. I decided I wanted to work across all areas within the MGA. So education, Medicaid, environmental justice, workforce accountability, immigration, transparency. But, a lot of areas, but there's one constant, and it's systems design. So I think that my work is not just about passing bills, it's more on the implementation part. And, I really like to throw out like stats and data points when I'm talking about this, but Maryland Latinos population is over 650,000. I love reminding people of that. So more than 11% of the state is going to be Latino, right? And that was in 2023 from the American Community Survey. So Latino students make up roughly 17% of public school enrollment statewide. How are we going to be able to get involved in that? That's how my mind works. But I think it's important to understand that I don't only work on Latino issues, although there is a need for advocates in that space to look for bills with that lens. But, I will say that the lens that I bring is structural equity, right? When I see a bill, a quick 4-question prong is who would benefit from this? Who is excluded? what is the data telling me, and what does this look like 2 years after passing? For the people that can help me answer that, I go directly to them. Sometimes it's a delegate, sometimes it's a senator, sometimes it's a community leader and an advocate that has been working on things so heavily. Long story short, right? I operate between communities and institutions. Government speaks kind of in statutes and acronyms, and communities speak in lived experience. So I make sure that, both sides are understood in only the way that I know how, and that is the Carlos way, that is mindful communications. And, this also connects back to the Call Act, because Owen was one of those people that found me, and I said, Owen, how am I able to push this forward? How can I help? So
I love that story, and if I wasn't already convinced that we need to get together and talk more, like that bit sold me right there. One of the reasons that we are focusing so much on the legislative session right now is because we think a lot of people who are disenchanted with the two-party system and who feel like it's not working for them and it's not working for their communities, don't have a good lens into what is happening in Annapolis during these crazy 90 days. We're halfway point tomorrow. And I think folks don't get a grasp of how that stuff works. And it makes sense, right? Like, you got to drive down there. It's long and it's fast. It's a sort of combination of days are long, hearings are long, but the 90 days goes by really quickly, and so we are trying to use this campaign and this show to talk about legislation that is not getting talked about in a way that helps people understand what it does, how it works, what our position on it is. So all of that to say, I love everything you just said. I love the long version of it and the short version of it, and I can't wait for us to get together sometime and talk more about our stories in Annapolis, our experiences, and how we take that and translate it to people who need that information, because state government is, as you know, the thing that people know the least about, but often has the most impact on their lives. So
if I can say just one more thing, there's a storytelling element that is needed in the day-to-day programming of the Maryland General Assembly. To me, when I see policy, and I recognize that I loved the law and policy because I saw poetry, to be honest with you. I see a love letter written to the people, and if it's not love, it's easy to call out. So
yeah.
I think a part of the name with the mindful communications is that it's spelled mind-fool communications. And I wanted to do that intentionally, because while it might sound like mindful, we're being mindful as we're speaking, you need more storage in this new day and age. You gotta come with 100%. So we're gonna be mindful, going towards these bills, going towards a direction which this society needs that change right now. And I'm very happy to be on this program to speak with you and Andrew, because, I truly believe that this is the direction that we need. So any way I can help, of course, I'm always here.
Excellent. I'm going to kick it back to you, Owen, for the next question, but I'm loving this so far. So thank you.
Yeah. It's pretty cool to see my friends starting LLCs. Andy mentioned he's starting one, or co-ops. My wife started her business recently. So it's awesome to see this growth of a progressive and people-centered ecosystem taking new forms, right? Not just that traditional 501c3, even though, of course, good work can be done within that. But kind of, zooming in a little bit on something you said, and I definitely hear the caveat that you're looking at, policy design and structural equity of underserved populations and marginalized groups in general. But, going back to some of the work that we've done most closely together, what does it look like when Latino or immigrant families, try to engage with systems like the school system, for example, and what are the barriers there?
And man, I could go in so many directions with this. And first, my goal with these answers is to get the structural part out. Then I'm going to riff, right? But I will say that, it looks like resilience, meeting a structural friction. It's always going to go back to that poetry for me. I think Latino families deeply value education. So if we are talking about school, I think that's a paramount importance. But engagement often requires navigating systems that assume the parent's English fluency, flexible work hours, familiarity with the bureaucratic processes, and now more than ever, digital access. And we're seeing that. Well, we saw it even more so during COVID. These kids have to stay home. Who do you think is the blue collar population? Who are the kids going to be able to stay with? But if we're speaking on that barrier aspect, it includes inconsistent interpretation, the quality, the standard, English only documentation that we were seeing, meetings scheduled during work hours. Like I said, that blue collar aspect, construction workers just can't leave. There are women who are childcare specialists. So, going even more so in the barriers, because I'm thinking of more, my mind's racing, is fear in mixed status families. Mm-hmm. There's limited transparency in data reporting. That's what we're seeing now. So, Maryland's overall graduation rate is about 87%. Latino students, they're graduating at slightly in lower rates in multiple districts. So, if there is an English learners crisis, it's what we're facing now within these gaps that I just mentioned above. Mm-hmm. But I think that right now, if we were to talk about the human aspect, right, take the school out of it, what does it look like when Latino families try to engage in any of these systems? Is, one thing that comes to my mind is a Reels project I did on the Maryland Latinos Unidos Instagram page. And I needed to do something about racial scripts. And I needed to redefine what Latinos in the media is looking like, because we aren't what, they're saying who we are or what we look like. And it's sad because it truly plays an impact in the children's eyes, how they see their parents. When I was younger, my father, he did landscaping. And I was so like in my mind worried that he would be pulling up with his trailer attached and everything, and people would see. And the reason I say that, and I bring this story up, is because I never once examined it from my father's perspective. And I think my positioning now and understanding the legislation, the battle with ICE, everything that's taking place right now, they're silent wars that are being faced, and the parents are experiencing it now more than ever. It's not just the ICE. It's not just that. It's public perception. Mm-hmm. And not many people incorporate that into their psyche when they're, you see all these horrible things on social media about, workplace harassment, people are being threatened with ICE, and then they have to go to their kids and, they have to be a parent, they have to be a fighter. So when you ask me what these families experience with these institutions, they're crippled from the beginning. So how are we able to fight that? How am I able to combat that with mindful communications, with partnering with amazing people such as yourselves? How can I access and navigate the advocacy realm for this story to be heard? So,
yeah. And I think that those are the questions of the now, and the questions of the sort of meantime as we're working to make it better and to defend communities and make life better. But I want to zoom out a little bit. On this campaign, we like to say we're working to build the Maryland that we all deserve. And so my question for you is, what is a state government that actually works for Latino communities look like to you? What is the new day, the future that we want to have?
It looks preventive, right? It funds Medicaid navigators before coverage drops. It embeds language access before lawsuits are filed. It reviews cumulative populations before issuing the permits that we're talking about now. It tracks students' progress before achievement gaps widen. I want to say this clear. Maryland is one of the wealthiest states in the country by median household income. But wealth does not automatically produce equity. And I think that's something that's kind of lost in translation. A functioning government it designs policy with demographic reality in mind, right? It publishes transparent data, responds meaningfully to public testimony that were given at the Maryland General Assembly for certain bills. And I do believe that a functioning government should measure outcomes and not press releases. When government works, it feels like stability. It feels like safety. It feels like families do not have to just fight every day to be heard. And that's the difference between reactive governance and intentional design. But we don't have to go there. The intentional design I could talk about all day, but
we'll have you come back and do a whole deep dive podcast where we get into intentional design and all the stuff that we don't get a chance to talk about today. Once session is over, before we started this live stream, I had a podcast that was like, I want to sit down with some of the best people I know and have them talk about the stuff they know really well in depth for an hour and a half. And I love that. It helps me learn. It has helped me understand so much more about the things that we're fighting for in this campaign, because I have that time to hear people who are great at the thing they do talk about the thing they do. And so all of that to say is 45 days from now, when session is over, probably not the day session is over, but closely thereafter, we're going to start that podcast back up again. And we'd love to have you come on and talk about intentional design and all the stuff that is the long version of the excellent short stories and short versions you're telling today. So open invitation for that, Carlos.
Awesome.
Yeah, very good. So, and you and Andy were talking about in that exchange back to state government. And while schools and Maryland State Department of Education is kind of not in the General Assembly governor realm, it's certainly part of state accountability. And so you and I and others in coalitions we've been a part of have pushed for more accountability from MSDE. We've had some successes, but we did not create a utopia in Maryland when it comes to immigrant education and language access and so forth. So what are some of the things that at the state level schools are still getting wrong and the Department of Education is still getting wrong? Where's the room for growth?
Well, I'll never blatantly say what they're getting wrong, right? You always want to butter them up. But I think I should start by acknowledging that the blueprint for Maryland's future is historic. I think me and Owen have had conversations about the blueprint before with our friend Frank. And by 2033, it represents more than $3.8 billion annually. So that's an additional education investment. So I will say this. That number is significant, $3.8 billion annually. But I don't think funding alone necessarily equals equity. So where we push MSDE is on outcomes and transparency. Those are the two doors where I'm looking at. If we are investing billions, there needs to be an answer for our English learners acquiring proficiency faster. Are Latino students accessing rigorous coursework proportionally? Are bilingual educators being recruited at scale? Are counties implementing consistently? Because this isn't just here, we're dropping it off and, there's not going to be any implementation. Hire me and I'll help. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things. But right now, reporting mechanisms focus heavily on compliance, but we need measurable equity benchmarks. I think benchmarks is the name of the game. And, this is something I learned in my master's program at UMD. So it's pretty basic from my understanding. And I think this ties back to everything that we've discussed, whether it's education, Medicaid, or environmental justice. The pattern is the same. We celebrate inputs. We do not always measure impact. And, as great as that is, that might have to change, but input, accountability means, from my eyes, disaggregated data, clear benchmarks, and implementation oversight. Otherwise, reform becomes branding. So that is my thought on that.
Yeah, and I was in the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee yesterday, and I imagine the same Frank was there testifying on behalf of one of the bills, and there was an exchange between him and Delegate Fisher, who is a Republican in the Freedom Caucus, and I really appreciated watching the advocates stand up to the Republicans on that case. Sometimes some of these committees, the Republicans, I think they sort of take two forms. One form is sort of the, well, I just have a quick side question that I'm going to ask that, isn't too intrusive. And then the other ones are, doing it for the Instagram, doing it for the videos and things like that. And it was good to see the advocates stand up and defend a position that it talks about investing in education and civil rights in education from the press of the Freedom Caucus. But that's what I've been watching. I've been parked in the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee. It is my new home. It is where I live on Wednesdays and increasingly Tuesdays, Thursdays, and other days too. Tomorrow is the halfway point of our 90-day General Assembly session. What are you watching? What should the audience know about important bills that are out there that you want to talk about?
I will say at a macro level, I'm watching three things. I'm watching immigrant protections, Medicaid stability, and environmental justice. It's important to know on Medicaid, just real quick, 1 in 4 Marylanders rely on it. Administrative changes could result in roughly 130,000, I believe was the number of Marylanders losing coverage due to paperwork barriers rather than eligibility changes. So, that affects emergency room usage, hospital budgets, insurance premiums statewide. On environmental justice, there is cumulative impact legislation, and that matters because communities of color, right, are disproportionately exposed to pollution from highways and industry facilities. If we don't evaluate, I think, cumulative burden before issuing permits, as I stated earlier, we reinforce that historic inequity. And let me tell you something, 2 words, data centers. We just passed something, or got the approval to conduct a study in Maryland. Fine. But don't for a second think that Meta isn't pushing billions of dollars out in commercials to already sell you a lifestyle that the data center promises. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a promise in politics and we end up getting, the other end of the stick. But anyway, I will go back to the question on, I think, immigrant protections, right? Transparency in enforcement affects school attendance, like we saw in this Maryland General Assembly, health-seeking behavior, and workforce stability. These are all interconnected issues, and this session is about whether we design systems to prevent harm or scramble to repair it after damage occurs. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about what is of cause of concern on a national scale. And it is Anthropic and the Department of Defense, and with AI. Marylanders need to know what is being discussed right now and what that whole drama is, because this is the end game. This is Captain America meets the villains. This is Star Wars. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'll let you guys.
Oh, yeah. So I was just going to say, 2 things there's a lot that you talked about there that we've talked about a lot on this show, but data centers and Anthropic are 2 things that we've probably talked about more than any show that is focused on Maryland politics at this point. And our position on data centers is we do not need hyperscale data centers in Maryland. We don't need to regulate them. We don't need to tell them to bring their own fracked gas plants. We just do not need them. And if we want to have community scale data centers that are supporting community-based tech projects, so people don't have to go through AWS and Oracle and all of those things, if they want to build a tech startup in West Baltimore or build a tech startup in Prince George's County, we should build those community scale renewable power data centers that are not at hyperscale, that are not trying to serve data for $1 trillion corporations, that are not bringing their own fracked gas plant. I mean, the fact that the Freedom Caucus and Governor Wes Moore agree that what we need more of is gas plants next to data centers, and this touches on the permitting question that you were talking about, right? Should tell all of us that neither of them have the best interest of Marylanders in mind. So data centers is a thing that we have talked about, and I'd love to keep talking about, because I think, if you look back to 2024, when Wes Moore signed the Critical Infrastructure Act, he said, I made this bill a priority because it will hypercharge the data center industry in our state. And sure enough, it has. But that, and then this fall, Governor Moore, Governor Youngkin, Governor Shapiro, and Governor Murphy put in a proposal to PJM, who's the regional grid operator, on behalf of the data center lobby, to allow this sort of bring your own power for data centers thing. So that is a topic that we've been following deeply, and I think it connects to the permitting questions that you're talking about and to a lot of the other questions that you're talking about. But Anthropic is a story that we've almost been covering since the first one of our live streams, when we realized that Governor Moore signed a deal to bring Anthropic into state government. So back in November, he signed a deal to bring Claude. We called the segment "Claude Gets a Government Job," and they brought Anthropic into state government. It was paid for by the Rockefeller Foundation, and the other part of this is a company called Percepta. Percepta was a spinoff from Palantir. So a Palantir executive left and formed Percepta, and Percepta is the implementation organization that the Rockefeller Foundation is paying for in the state of Maryland. So if Claude starts to get trained on autonomous weapons, and Claude starts to get trained on mass surveillance, it is already processing benefits in the state of Maryland, according to this deal. One of our volunteers, and not really volunteer, like active campaign worker who refuses to get paid, but she has filed a whole ton of PIA requests to get the info on this deal, and the state is not telling us what the data use agreement is with Anthropic. The state is not telling us what the protection is with Percepta. So I mentioned that Percepta spun off from Palantir. Palantir is suing Percepta for taking all of Palantir's information, and a federal judge last week issued an injunction against Percepta taking anybody else from Palantir. It is a very likely, or at least possible, outcome of that case that Palantir will own Percepta at the end of this, which means that Palantir will have a foot in Maryland government processing benefits without a concrete data use agreement. So you are absolutely right that we need to be talking about that. And it's not just a national question. It is a Maryland question too, because the Rockefeller Foundation is funding Claude and state government, and using the Palantir spinoff as the implementation company. And not only are we about to have a Claude that is like literally the Terminator, if Pete Hegseth gets his way, but we're probably about to have Palantir owning the implementation of it when they win this lawsuit against Percepta. So we'll send you some of the links on some of that stuff, but it is like, as you can tell, this is a topic I like to talk about a little bit. But it is super important that we pay attention to that stuff, because the state government doesn't know how they're protecting people's information. They don't know how they're protecting the benefits claims that Wes Moore mentioned in the State of the State address that AI is starting to process. And that goes right to this mass surveillance question that is at the heart of the DoD thing. So it's already here. We don't have a good data agreement. We've been filing PIA requests to get it. And that story is going to have real active ramifications in Maryland, regardless of what it has across the country.
You know, and when I have these conversations, you know, I will say this: it's always great to be in circles or triangles in this conversation where you're speaking with like-minded individuals. And usually, sometimes when you bring these topics up, it scares people. Yeah. And you know what? While it is scary, this is what we've been trained for our whole lives. Right. You know, we have so many. It humbles me when I work in these circles within the community, and I see people that have been here 20 years, 25, 30, and you really get to see that they have stripes for the battlefield. Yeah. And it brings me back to, you know, kind of what Captain America said. He's willing to die for this cause, and he's willing to bet he isn't the only one. And there are more of us out there, and I'm glad you guys are putting on platforms where people can hear what you're saying and the message is coming across. And I really hope you guys win this thing here, because I'm cheering for you. Yeah,
we'll find a spot for you in the cabinet when we win. we'll bring you in, and you can make sure that all that stuff that you want, the resources and the opportunity to do it, is your job for the cabinet. So
Wow, that all right, from your lips to God's ears.
right.
So yeah, thanks so much, Carlos, for coming on and being part of this conversation. I mean, how can people follow your work or get involved, get in touch with you to learn more about mindful communications and other work that you're doing?
You know what? It's so funny because when I started Mindful Communications, I wanted to do the whole kit and caboodle, the website, the Instagram page, the everything. But by word of mouth, it already spread. So I haven't even had time to do the website or anything. But what I will say is that my email is always available. And can I say it on here?
Yeah, sure.
It's going to be Orbe. That's my last name. ORBE.Carlos91@gmail.com. That is how you can communicate with me. I also am on Instagram, and that is going to be Cheesy or Beezy. That is the tagline I'm sticking with. Got it since high school. And cheesy is spelled with a Z because I am the positive light in politics, and people think it's cheesy sometimes, but that's all I can be. So, yeah.
Love it.
I can't top that. That's excellent. And Carlos, this was awesome. This is a great way to get to meet you. I hope this is the first of many conversations that we can have where we talk about all this stuff. Like, we can talk about Claude and government. We can talk about stuff that is happening at the legislature, but we can also talk about bringing that back to communities of people who need something different, because what they have right now is not working. And the two parties have abandoned folks except at election day in a lot of cases. And we need to build something that helps us to get to the Maryland that we all deserve, so that we can all thrive and benefit from living in one of the wealthiest states in the country and have good community, have good connections, and have good government. At the end of the day, this is about good government and good society and good people. And we're so excited to get to include you in the conversation. I hope it's the first of many. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I can't wait to see you around the halls of Annapolis, talk to you on on another StreamYard, or do some creative thing that Owen designs for us to get together and talk through some of this stuff.
Gotcha. Well, we're gonna have a great time. Thank you both so much for having me on. And just one more thing here. If Maryland truly wants to transform who we are, we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what are we going to stand for? So I tell everyone, when every opportunity I get, right now is all about perspective and choice. Make your choice. Be the change in the world you want to see. So thank you both so much. I look forward to hearing from you guys and the amazing things you're going to be doing. I'm only a call away, Owen, so please let me know.
Excellent. Thank you, Carlos.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, that was awesome. An excellent guest, another excellent guest, another amazing perspective of somebody doing really great stuff. Thank you so much for bringing Carlos into the fold, Owen, and I can't wait to have more conversations with him.
Yeah, you can see how passionate he is about this advocacy work and better communication around policies, more community involvement. And I thought you two would hit it off. And when you started geeking out about the AI stuff, I was like, oh yeah, this is a good friendship in the making here. So glad it worked out. So next up, we're moving to our fourth segment, which is kind of a recap, because the filing deadline, at least for the two corporate funded parties, the Democrats and Republicans, passed on Tuesday. Right. So you've done some number crunching, and the numbers don't look so hot for the state of our democracy, do they?
No, so the two-party system, I think the takeaway is the two-party system is not healthy. And voters in many cases don't really have meaningful choices within the two-party system about about their elections, and I think that the change that occurred this year, a lot of the numbers look the same as they look in 2022, but what we've seen is a Democratic Party expansion and a Republican Party contraction. And so as long as the Republicans are the opposition party in the two-party system, it should be worrying to everybody. I'm never going to vote for a Republican, right? But if Republicans are what the two-party system offers as opposition, and they're declining quickly, we have a real problem with the two-party system. I think what's great about that, though, is we have a real opportunity to build out Maryland's multi-party system, and I think this filing deadline shows it. So let me get into some of the numbers. So in the state Senate, 25 of 47 districts will have no two-party general election. That's 53% of the state Senate, where if a third-party candidate or an independent candidate does not file for office, the person who wins the primary will win the general election without a contested general election. 22 of those are Dem-only seats. 3 of those are Republican-only seats. And 17 senators, 36% without a third-party challenge, will take office with 0 competitive election at any stage. No contested primary and no contested general. That's more than 1/3 of the Maryland State Senate who, if no third-party or independent candidate comes on and they vote for themselves, they will have their position. That is not elections decided by the voters. That is elections decided by the map, the two parties, and the filing deadline. In the House of Delegates, 27 of 71 contests, 38%, have no two-party general election competition. 24 of those are Democrat only. 3 of those are Republican only. And again, that's a significant shift from the last cycle, where they were more evenly split between Republicans and Democrats. In 11 contests for 18 seats, 15% have no competitive election at any stage in the primary or the general election. So numbers much higher in the state Senate, but still absurdly high in the House of Delegates. Combined for the Maryland General Assembly, 44% of races have no two-party general election competition. That is 84 seats out of the 188 seats in Annapolis have no two-party competition. 28 races, 35 seats total, have no competition at any stage. And those legislators are going to Annapolis as long as they vote for themselves, unless Greens, Libertarians, Working Class Party, or independent candidates step up to run against them. In the governor's race, there's 2 there's 2 Democratic tickets, 9 Republican tickets, and a Green ticket. At the county level, 74 of 95 countywide offices, 78% of county offices have single party only competition, no general election competition. And only, I think, 1 of the state's attorney's races has multi-party competition in it. Every county has at least some cross-party competition on the ballot when you include the county council races, but that's because Democrats made that happen. In Howard County, there's 1 Republican running, and in Prince George's County, I think there's 2 Republicans running. And the other counties, and the counties that are more red, there's Democrats that filed for a lot of things because Democrats have been making a push to run for every race. Republicans have been making that push too, but they regressed instead of progressed. Now, if we think about this in comparison of 2022 to 2026, the number of uncontested House races is the same. So that's pretty interesting, right? 27 is the same number for both of them, but the composition shifted drastically. And the Republican went from not filing in 16 races to 24 races this time around, whereas the Democrats shrank from not filing in 11 races to not filing in 3 races. And, races with that are a clear path improved, they dropped some. And Democrats really expanded their filing reach. But to me, the takeaway here is that the two-party system is not producing competition. And without competition, elected officials are not accountable to voters. And they're accountable to party leaders, they're accountable to donors, and they're accountable to national narratives. And if you want the best way to increase accountability to voters is to have competition. I think the other thing about this is that this system, this two-party system, is not getting better at producing competition. It's getting worse at producing competition. And the real answer in the long term is a lot of the multi-party type of things that we've been talking about all year. We understand this problem. It's not new. It's this year's version of this problem, which is why we've been talking about multi-party democracy all this time. But the short-term answer is that people need to go and file and run as a Green, file and run as an independent, help the Libertarian party get on the ballot and run as a Libertarian, and go file as a working class party candidate. That's the only way we're going to get competition in a lot of these races. Otherwise, voters are going to have no say in some cases and little say in other cases about who their electeds are. I know that's a lot, and I've been really zoomed in on this data. But I've been zoomed in on it because I knew what it was going to say. Because, again, this is this year's version of the data. It's not a new phenomenon in Maryland. We talk a whole lot about the number of independent voters. We talk a whole lot about the number of people who are appointed to their position when we talk about the breakdown of democracy. But what we don't talk about is the way that there is not one party or two party competition in a large number of our seats. And if we wonder why folks in Annapolis are not paying attention to us, our communities, and the wants and needs that Carlos was talking about, it is because they don't have competitive primaries and they don't have competitive general elections. And that means they don't have to be accountable to voters because voters have no say in whether they get there or stay there.
Yeah. It is disturbing to see this lack of competition, to see how many uncontested races, at least at this point. But I would say, don't despair. You can run Green with us. You can run with another one of the non-principal parties, or collect signatures to run as an independent, right? So I think that's the takeaway, is this is the February, late winter vibe of the election. And we're optimistic that there will be more contested races in the general election by the time our filing deadline rolls around for this summer.
Yep. And so July 6th is the filing deadline for independent candidates and non-principal parties. And if you are thinking about running in one of these races where somebody is uncontested, please give us a call. Please shoot us an email, Andy@gogreen2026.com. Owen at gogreen2026.com. We will talk to you about our ideas. We'll let you know what you need to do. We'll get you in touch with the state Green Party. We would love to see a bunch of Greens contesting these races so that voters have some meaningful choice on election day, and electeds have some accountability to those voters and not just their national narratives, their donors, and their party bosses, because that's what happens when there's no competition. And so we've been doing a lot of work to lay the long-term foundation for a multi-party democracy that is healthy and has multiple parties represented in Annapolis, that allows voters to be able to hold people accountable and allows voters to feel like they have a say in electing their leaders. And that is the long-term work that we're building. In the short term, the answer to the crisis that is created by the two parties in the failure of the two parties to provide meaningful competition is for you and people in your community to run outside of that two-party system and restore the competition in the general election that both parties have worked to deny you. So, it's a lot of numbers. Dana, I will get to work on some visualizations for that. And it's important. It's not just a ha. This is the type of thing that political insiders will joke about. Ha, look, it's another year where this person gets to go to Annapolis just by voting for themselves. That is not a joke. That is a problem. It is a serious democratic deficit, and it comes from relying on the two parties to be the ones that give us the competition, instead of realizing that our multi-party system is the way that we keep the democracy healthy. And if we don't use it, everything will suffer. And if we do use it, we have the ability to strengthen it now and strengthen it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm excited too about not just us, but other candidates who are using public financing or attempting to qualify for public financing. And hopefully that shows folks who, would like to run, but maybe don't have networks of wealthy folks to write them 3,000 or 6,000 checks or aren't incumbents who have done favors for the lobbyists and the bundlers and the corporations. It'll give more folks hope that they can run and have a competitive and meaningful campaign.
Yep. And so I think that transitions well into the next thing that we have on our agenda, which is some Q&A. This is a thing we were doing in 2025, but we want to start again. And I'm checking my phone right now because I had gotten a question come in earlier today from Hunter in Maryland. And Hunter in Maryland was saying that they're very interested in throwing support behind expanding a third-party operation, and starting at the state and local level makes absolute sense. But they're concerned that our focus is only on grassroots democracy and electoral reforms. Oops, I lost the question here. I'm trying to go back to it. And they want to know about the rest of the things that we believe in. And so I think this is a great question. And I'll get the full question posted up there in a second. Let's see if I can get it pulled up here. Oh, yeah. So they like most people are tired of being locked between two flavors of the same candidate. However, other than the goal of voter reform, I can't seem to find some clear policy goals of this campaign. Would you will list some of your top goals other than voter reform so potential voters can see what exactly it is you stand behind? And so I want to take this question in two parts and then get your thought on it, Owen. The first part is, we are very focused on electoral reform and civic engagement because we believe that those are the things that we can actually change whether we win or whether we lose. And we believe that that the system that we have of government, the system that we have of elections, the system we have of voting contributes to the outcomes that we get that we don't like right now. And so the real material place that we're spending a lot of our time and energy is on transforming the broken political system that we have right now, because that broken political system is what leads to the outcomes and what leads to the apathy that causes people to want to drop out of politics. So yes, we are very focused on electoral reform. We're very focused on multi-party systems. We're very focused on money in politics. And we are that because we think we can change it. We think we can use this campaign in order to push a movement for a multi-party Maryland and to get money out of politics. And we think those are actual and tangible things that we can do. Now, that's the first part of it. The second part of it is I think Hunter asks a really good question about what our policies are. Some of those policies are under construction right now. We are working on our education policy at the moment. We believe in fully funding the blueprint and expanding the investment in local education. We believe in protecting teachers. We believe in protecting educators. We believe in expanding union protections. We also believe in giving schools and communities more power over the decisions that they're making instead of bureaucrats in Annapolis. We believe in an immigration system in the state of Maryland where immigrant communities do not feel threatened constantly every time they walk outside of the house because local sheriffs might be cooperating with federal authorities. We believe in local law enforcement that protects safe spaces and protects places where communities and families need to go. We believe in and let's see what else. We believe in an energy system that is run publicly and controlled by the people of the state of given power over to and given a monopoly to, so that they can make record profits while our rates are going up at a record rate. We believe in a public bank that would fund infrastructure projects so that we're not reliant on Washington or Washington, so that more community and more cooperative owned business can be on the grid here in Maryland in a way that can sustain our communities when we realize that we can't be reliant on other things. We believe in ending corporate tax breaks, and we believe in ending taxes and fees on working class Marylanders and taxing the wealthy more so that we can pay for the things that we need and take off the burden on working families. So we're going to put a lot of this stuff out on our priority page. I appreciate Hunter's pressing us on this because we are 250 days from the election and all we're talking about is elections seemingly. And I get the concern about that. And A, that is intentional, but B, there is a lot of other stuff that we believe in and that we're going to advance. At the end of the day, We believe that our work is to expand the possibility of a multi-party system in Maryland because we think that that system is the way to return power to the voters. We think that a strong left grassroots perspective needs to be in that system so that the kind of ideas that we're talking about can be implemented. But at the end of the day, our focus is in a lot of ways on the electoral reforms, on the voting reforms, and on the campaign finance reforms, because that's the thing that we think we can actually materially change whether we win or lose. The other stuff we got to win to do, but that type of stuff we think we can do without winning. So I want to get what your thoughts are on that question as well, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Hunter. Thank you. I think I would break up some of our policies into two categories, maybe which aren't as obvious publicly facing, but Andy's been running this campaign for a little bit longer than I have. But some of our policies are based on listening to people, bringing experts and activists onto the show and developing policy around that. For example, the publicly owned utilities position that we've taken recently. Some of our positions are based on our long-term grassroots solidarity-based organizing, right? Andy and I have been activists for, in Andy's case, decades, in my case, over a decade. And so when we talk about things like ending Maryland's complicity with genocide in Palestine, when we talk about reparations, like these aren't positions we're just taking for the campaign. These are very, intimately and deeply tied to our longstanding grassroots organizing and protest work and on these issues. And so I think like those are two that really speak to me. I think they're not the first two issues that you might think of for a gubernatorial campaign, but Carlos over and over again mentioned structural change being needed. And I think when we talk about having Maryland investing workers' pensions in genocide and in Israel defense bonds, for example, like that's got to change. And when we think about the governor vetoing a reparations bill and the shenanigans that went on with that, like that's got to change. And so that's why we're running this campaign in large part, is because we've used many other avenues of activism to create change, and that this is a way to bring some of that organizing work into the electoral sphere, or to create another platform for it in the electoral sphere.
Yep. And what I would say to Hunter is, if you're watching, I hope this is a good answer for you. This is the thing that we're happy to engage on. And I will leave this question with two things. One is, if you like our electoral reform stuff, but you don't like any of the policies that we're offering, that's okay. You can vote for us in order to say that you're tired of the two-party trap. And even if you don't agree with the policies, you're going to vote for folks who are willing to stand up and call it what it is and lay out a path for the future so that we can get to a better place. That's on one side. If you don't believe in the electoral reform stuff, but you believe in a lot of the policy stuff that we have to offer, that's okay too. That's another reason that you can vote for us, is because we're championing issues that are important to you and that are not being heard by any of the other people in the governor's campaign. So if you like both the electoral stuff and the policy stuff, then please get in touch with Andrew, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago. He's our people coordinator, and we'll be happy to have you work with him in order to bring your energy to the campaign. But if you like one or the other, we think that's a great reason to vote for us, and a great reason to tell the two-party system that you understand it's a trap and that you're going to get out of it.
And we have another question too, right?
Yeah. So Hannah from Ellicott City asks, what exactly do you plan to do in pursuit of sustainability and conservation in terms of the fight against fossil fuels and climate change? Your priority pages only mention declaring an emergency, Hannah in Ellicott City. This is a great question, and it's something that we're actively working on. So let me say a couple of things here. The reason that we say that we want to declare an emergency is because we think that these things are urgent. And we saw during the COVID state of emergency how quick the government and the state of Maryland can act if there's a state of emergency on something. So what we would like to see is, if we get elected, we'd declare an emergency right away. We'd tell the General Assembly to work on things like pollution on our waterways, agricultural pollution, environmental racism, emissions, transportation. And if they didn't act in a way that was meeting the needs of the communities that are most threatened by this right now, we would begin to take executive action immediately after the session is over to address those things with the things that we know the communities say work. So that's why we focus on emergency as the mechanism. But I think it goes beyond that. We want to take power, or we want to take the power grid back from the electrical companies and build out reliable and extensible renewable power across the state of Maryland. A couple of weeks ago, we had Shane Robinson on, who was talking about his plan in 2018 to build the Maryland-based capacity for renewables. And we would love to see a plan like that be brought back up so that we're not buying credits for renewable energy and calling it renewable. Last week, we talked to Pat Elder, who is an internationally renowned expert on PFAS and water contamination. So we're going to be working with Pat in order to come up with a policy to talk about wastewater and the Potomac and in all of our other waterways. We are also, as we said before, going to ban hyperscale data centers and make sure that those are no longer part of what we do in Maryland. We're going to end the co-location of coal in Curtis Bay and in other communities. And all of this is part of a set of energy and environment policies that we expect to be releasing this spring. So Hannah, we'll have more on some of these things coming very soon. And the energy policy, the environment policy, they're all on tap in March. And there are all things that we think Greens have to be at the center of. And, for a lot of that is about power, but not all of it is about power. Some of it is about water, but not all of it is about water. Some of it is about agriculture and land use, but not all of it is. So I think this is a really good question. And I appreciate it when folks hone in on these things where we have not caught up with the things that are important to them yet. And it is good for us to have that reminder that we need to get that stuff out. It's in the hopper and it's ready to come out, but we want to get it out so that you can, see it, and then we can discuss it and share it on this show and beyond.
Yeah, it's a great question. Also, Hannah, I think the priorities page on the website is due for an update, and that part in particular, we're working on it. We've been talking about it on the show and in other platforms, some of the different sustainability pieces and environmental justice policies that we want to put forward. And we've been having guests on who focus on some of these topics. I also think we want to do it right, and that's why we're taking our time with it. But we also, both of us have a pretty long track record before this campaign on some of these issues too. So, working on a bill in Baltimore City to ban gas stations, work that I did around developing the Maryland Green New Deal proposal. So these aren't things that we've pulled into the campaign at this point, but I think it's worth, checking our receipts too on the long haul organizing we've done around environmental justice, publishing the list of all the state delegates and senators who took funding from the trash incinerators across the state. This is the kind of stuff that we've been involved in. And yes, we definitely need to flesh out this plank of our platform, and we will. We're committed to it.
Yep. So if you got questions, go to gogreen2026.com /questions, and we will try to address them on here. we may not answer them fully to make you happy. We always expect the people to engage and back and forth with us on the social medias or on the YouTube. So if you hear us say something and you're like, yeah, that's close, but not good enough, tell us. Or if you have an idea for something you'd like to see us incorporate, tell us that too. I think the one thing I didn't mention is that we've been working with Michelle, who's a green out in Western Maryland, on some policy to deal with some of the things that come about as byproducts of the fracking industry here. We have a fracking moratorium in Maryland, but that doesn't mean that fracking materials and fracking processes are not running through the state of Maryland. If all the states surrounding us are engaging in fracking, it's going through Maryland. And so one of the other things that will be in our policy is what we do in order to actually make our ban a real ban, so that Maryland isn't dealing with the consequences of the fracking industry and just pretending, by just banning one part of it, but is actually protecting our citizens from that toxic industry and what's going on with it.
Yeah, and send us your ideas. Like Andy said, I just want to reemphasize that if you have policies that you think should be in our platforms, send them our way. We'd love to review them.
Well, that was a big show. We did a lot on this show. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling still enthused after almost 2 hours. We were keeping it kind of closer to the 90-minute length for a while, but yeah, we had a lot to say, and Carlos had a lot of great points to make. So I'm glad we went a little bit longer than we have been the last few shows.
Yeah, I will do what we started the show not doing and say I'm feeling very excited. I had a long day today. I've had a long week. And as the conversation was going on about what we're talking about, but then especially once Carlos got here, I just felt so energized and so excited. And I'm thrilled. I can't wait for what the next 250 days are going to be like. I think that we're gaining momentum. We're starting to get people who are pressing us on things that we need to do. And that is a sign that people want to see what we have to say and that there's real value in this. I do want to let folks know that a couple of weeks ago, we had Andrew Einem on the show, and we talked about how he was going to be joining us as our people organizer. Well, he is officially on board at this point. We are really excited to have him on board. I should have saved it for that, but we are thrilled to have him on board. And he is going to be doing some of the stuff that we haven't had the chance to do, which is making sure that we are connecting each person who wants to support the campaign to a way that they can support. And so all of that is very good news. And we're very happy to share that we've brought him on board this week. And
that's Dr. Andrew to you and to me.
That's right. Dr. Andrew Einem will be joining us as our people organizer. And, he is joining us in a very part-time role that is very generous right now. And if you want to help us expand his role and make sure that he can bring the union organizing experience that he brought to Johns Hopkins to this campaign, please go to gogreen2026.com/donate. You can make a donation anywhere between $3 and $250. Right now, any donations we get are probably going to help us pay our people. And so we would love to have anything that we can to help with that. We're going to, I think he'll help us with fundraising some, but we also got to be able to pay him. We got a couple months that we feel secure on, but our team is growing. We're starting to get to the point where we have the folks that we need to do the real work in order to build the Maryland that we all deserve. But we got to make sure that in this economy, we can put checks in people's pockets so that they can eat and pay rent, because that's the reality of it. So if you can, please help us out with the donation today or any other day.
Yeah, we're running against at least 2 millionaires who have lots of millionaire friends, and we don't. We have you. And so please help us out, help fuel this campaign with a small dollar donation.
Excellent. Well, with that, I think I'm good for this week. We went a little bit long tonight, but I think it was worth it. Owen, anything you want to say before we go?
Peace out, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, same thing. Peace to everyone, and work with us to build the Maryland that we all deserve. Have a good night. Thank you.